Hey, folks, welcome back to the podcast. This is the 28th episode, and super excited to bring a guest on today called Dr. Mohammed. For those of you that don't know, I will just give a quick introduction. Maybe in a sec, I'll just let Dr. Mohammed speak, and yeah, we'll go from there. Can you hear me okay? All good?
Yeah, yeah, I could hear you, man. I don't really know how to really introduce myself. I guess I'm just I'm a doctor that's been to Gaza a few times during the genocide. I also am from Gaza as well. So it's kind of given me a bit of a unique look at the perspective of being in Gaza while being from Gaza, as one of the only few Palestinian doctors that was allowed into Gaza. I think from all the doctors that have entered Gaza in the last 2 years on medical missions, I think only three of the doctors were from Gaza themselves, Western doctors that were from Gaza. So, the three of us had a very unique experience because, as the bombings were going on and as the genocide was taking place, we were with family. And I think that's kind of really a unique perspective when you're in hospital and you don't know when the patients are coming into hospital, whether some of them would be your family. We very much lived the same Palestinian experience as the healthcare workers in Gaza, who you'd see videos of sometimes their children being brought in or killed. And, we kind of lived that experience. There would be times where I worked at Al Aqsa Hospital in Deir el-Belah, and that's where my family is. And there would be a bombing. And when they would give me the location of where the bombing was, I always panicked because, that particular area was where my auntie's house was or where my uncle's house was. So I would always be bracing myself when the paramedics would be coming in to which family it was that they were bringing in. And, that's kind of a bit different to other people, because when you're opening up the blankets to see who's been killed or who's injured, you don't know if you're opening up the blankets and it's your family. So that was a unique experience that I think me and those other doctors from Gaza, Western doctors from Gaza, that shared while we were in Gaza.
Yeah, wow, it seems like a really, maybe not really, but it seems like an experience that is unique. It's something that only one can go through if they've really lived through it. So I want to give the time today to maybe talk about your experience in
Yeah,
Gaza, your
yeah.
experience working there. Uh, but I suppose first of all, hope you don't mind, I'll just give a quick bit of introduction. Sorry, one sec. Someone just entered in the room, so I don't mean to. I may edit this out of the podcast.
Yeah, no worries.
Just quickly, here's a summary of what is publicly known to Dr. Mohammed Mustafa, often referred to as Dr. Mo, based on recent media coverage. Dr. Mohammed Mustafa is a British Australian emergency physician of Palestine heritage, currently based in Perth, Australia. He trained in the UK, moved to Australia in 2017, and became an Australian citizen in 2023. His family background is Palestinian, and his parents are originally from Gaza and the West Bank. What he has done, human interests and humanitarian work. Since 2024, Dr. Mustafa has volunteered as an emergency doctor in Gaza, including what was one of the last functioning hospitals in Gaza City, which I think we touched upon, the Al Ahil Arab Hospital, also called the Baptist Hospital, if I'm correct in saying that.
Yeah,
He returned from Okay, perfect. He returned from his second mission in mid 2025 and has publicly described the conditions in Gaza as apocalyptic, children starving, hospitals overwhelmed, horrifying injuries. He reports that on some days he was the only doctor with a thermometer in the emergency department. On other days, the hospital itself came under bombardment. Advocacy and campaign. Building a children's hospital in Gaza. Dr. Mustafa is now campaigning globally for the construction of a children's hospital in Gaza, built from modular units funded by donors and staffed by international medical teams. He has met with leaders, policymakers, and governments to push for humanitarian support. For example, he met with Australia's Foreign Minister Penny Wong and has addressed members of the Irish Parliament. His campaign emphasizes the hospital is not about money per se, but about restoring dignity and providing medical care to children in one of the world's most dire crises. Why he has received attention. The first person testimonies, video dispatches, and social media posts from Dr. Mustafa describing the violence, suffering, and collapse of the medical infrastructure in Gaza have resonated globally and drawn widespread media coverage. His story, a doctor with Palestinian roots working in crisis zones, bridging Western medical training and frontline humanitarian service, has become symbolic of international medical solidarity amid conflict. And I suppose what I'd love to get in today, Dr. Mohammed and Dr. Mose, it states as well, is a bit about your background and your story leading up to Gaza as well, not just the the conflict and your experience, but I'd love to know maybe for those listening, and maybe it's the first time hearing about you, which for a lot, maybe in Ireland and Australia, maybe it's not, but I'd love to know maybe your background, maybe a bit about what childhood was like and getting into maybe medicine. We touched upon playing a bit of rugby as well, so I'd love to know that.
Yeah, well, first of all, hi, thanks for having me on the podcast. You know, my life is it's a very typical Palestinian life, and at the same time, it's not very typical. As Palestinians before the Syrian war, one third of all refugees around the world were Palestinian. So the Palestinian diaspora was so vast. You had Iraqi Palestinians, Kuwaiti Palestinians, Lebanese Palestinians, Jordanian Palestinians, British Palestinians, American Palestinians, French Palestinians. The Palestinian diaspora were spread out all over the world, and they there's almost like a little bit of a flavor to each Palestinian that you meet. The Palestinians that grew up in the refugee camps in Lebanon are very different to the Palestinians that grew up in Australia or the UK. They have a very different set of circumstances, a very different set of challenges that they have. Growing up in a refugee camp in Jordan as a Palestinian in the 70s is very different to growing up as a Palestinian in Ireland, for example. There is a clear difference. And that's why every Palestinian's story is quite unique. Everyone has a unique twist to what challenges they faced as a Palestinian, what family they have in the West Bank or Gaza, and what challenges do their extended family face. So, for my story, I was a refugee, Palestinian refugee, whose father was born and raised in Gaza, who then studied and grew up in Egypt. And eventually, I was born in Saudi Arabia, in Mecca, in Saudi Arabia, of all places, in the Holy City. And I moved to the UK when I was 4 years old. And I was a refugee up until the age of about 16 years old before I got my British passport and British citizenship. So, I grew up as a refugee, for the pretty much most of my teenage, like most of my childhood, I was a refugee. And that really kind of shapes who you are and how you see the world. When you're growing up and England are playing in the World Cup and this, that, and the other, you might be wearing your England shirt. I remember when I was at school, but I also knew that I was a refugee, that I could be told to leave at any moment. So it was kind of hard, having these internal conflicts where all I know is the UK. I moved there when I was 4 years old. All I know is Britain. All I know is, watching rugby on TV and Greg's and, like all the fish and chips um, and watching Match of the Day on a Saturday night and a Sunday. And, that's all I knew. Growing up as a kid, I just knew these very typical British things. And that's how I identified myself. But, growing up as a Palestinian refugee, you also have to face and deal with the fact that, like, you're watching TV sometimes and you're seeing your family members be killed, and it talked about like they're just numbers. You're watching your ancestral home be eroded day after day, and that's that's why there's no two Palestinians that have the same story. we all have a unique um, journey. You know, some of us grew up in a middle class life in Kuwait. You know, others grew up in a refugee camp in Syria under Bashar Assad. You know, these are very different lives, even within the Middle East, that Palestinians can face. And that's part of the reason why there's so much diversity within Palestinian thinking, politically, within um, the Palestinian diaspora of how they move forward. And even within Palestine itself, you know, Palestine is divided between the West Bank and Gaza, governed by two different sets of governments, and, you know, two sets of people that, you know, rarely get the chance to mix because of because of Gaza being essentially an open air prison and the West Bank being, you know, on lockdown with so many checkpoints and restricted access of movement. And therefore, the reality of a Palestinian in Gaza is very different to a Palestinian in Ramallah, for example. And a Palestinian from Ramallah's life is very different to a Palestinian in Jenin. So even within Palestine, Palestinians have a very different set of lives. Those in Jerusalem, you know, those that live in Jenin, sometimes have never even been to Jerusalem, have never prayed in Masjid al-Aqsa in the Al-Aqsa Mosque. So this is what I mean by you can never ever have enough Palestinian stories, because even Palestinians within Palestine all will tell you a different story of their existence, of their oppression, of the challenges that they faced. And I think, you know, I'm not unique. You know, I've got a unique story, but the unique story is unique in the sense that they're all unique. So if all the Palestinian stories are unique, is mine really any more unique than anybody else's? You know, it's just another Palestinian story. I just have a few more unusual twists to it. A Palestinian that played rugby for the England students team, a Palestinian that does a bit of jiu-jitsu here and there, a Palestinian who, you know, went to Gaza and served during the genocide as a doctor. You know, there's not many of us Palestinians that went. I think in total there was maybe about 18 Palestinian doctors and nurses, like Palestinian heritage doctors and nurses that went to work in Gaza from the West. And of those, I think only about three or four of us were actually from Gaza itself. And that gives you a totally different perspective and unique outlook, I would say, on uh, on the whole situation.
Yeah, thanks for sharing, Mohammed. I'd love to know as well, and I appreciate you mentioned that there's so many with the Palestinian diaspora. There's so many stories, and there's so many people from different backgrounds, and everyone has, I suppose, their own voice to share what's been going on. But I'd love to know your transition from, you mentioned being a refugee growing up, and then getting into medicine, and then from medicine then going to Gaza. I'd love to know those transitions in your life, if if you don't mind sharing. It's
Do you know, I just grew up watching my father as a doctor, and that really inspired me to do something because, you know, he took himself from poverty, you know, from not owning a pair of shoes till he was like 13 years old, from, you know, having to steal fruits off trees to eat. That's how poor he was. And he took himself from that to being a leading, or maybe the leading fertility specialist in the UK. And he did that by working hard and studying, and medicine was his path. And he could have been bitter at the world, but instead he became a healer. And, you know, that was just really powerful to me. Um, what somebody could do with all that pain and all that hurt and all that suffering, that they could really change so many people's lives. And I kind of wanted to be like that.
Yeah, that's great that you had a positive role model in your life growing up, especially with revolving around medicine and hard work
Mhm.
and helping people. And uh, did you find that, if you don't mind me asking, did you find that also rugby was a great support for you growing up and sports, or
Do you know, rugby was one of those things where it finally made me feel at home. You know, when you're part of a rugby team, rugby is unique. It's not like other sports. You know, you have the number nine to the prop. They couldn't be more different. You have a prop and a winger. They couldn't look more different. They couldn't play more different. And Yet all of these people are needed in one team. They need to play together. They all have different jobs and roles to play, and you know, I always felt that I was a little bit different. But when I came onto the rugby pitch, like I had this role that I had to play, and if I played that role well, I had everyone's acceptance, and it was a way where when I became good at rugby, you know, I was embraced by the rugby teams that I played for. I was embraced by my rugby mates, um, and I could show my passion and my commitment on the field, and that would translate into the friendships that I would form, the bonds that I would form, and the memories I would form. And, it gave me this discipline, it gave me this sense of belonging that I never had growing up as a refugee. And that's what rugby gave to me. And, you know, I, I could never, I could never repay rugby enough for the confidence that it gave me. When you're a young lad and you're playing representative rugby and you're traveling around Europe playing for the England students team, or you're playing professional rugby like I did. It gives you this sense of like, I did this. My talents did this. I was undeniable. It didn't matter where I was from, or what the color of my skin was, or what religion I was, or what my name was. When I play and I touch that ball and I score tries, or I tackle well, or I scrummage hard, those are things that people can't take away from me. People have taken away my home. People have taken away my family. People have taken away my rights and my dignity. But on this rugby pitch, you have to fight me if you want to take away this ball from me. If you want to take away that inch, you have to fight. And I was prepared to fight.
That's a really great story, and also a metaphor for maybe. I don't want to put words in your mouth here, Dr. Mo, but you may have taken that spirit, that the willingness to fight, was that taken then into your role as I'll first touch upon your role in professional rugby before we get into that, or your experience in professional rugby. How was that? Was that something that you look back positively on, or
It's mixed. It's mixed. It's mixed. It was a difficult time. I was playing professional sports and a medical school at the same time. There was a lot on my plate, I think, at the time. But it led me down the path that I am on now. And I feel like, the high stakes pressure, whether it's rugby, whether it's being a doctor in a war zone, these are all high stakes things. And I feel like I sometimes you just have to throw caution to the wind, in this life. Sometimes you're never going to have the right answer. And sometimes the circumstances are going to be so overwhelming, and it's going to be so different to anything you've ever experienced, that you can't be guided by experience. You literally have to be guided by faith. When I'm there in Gaza and I picked up the camera and I started recording mass casualty events, I started recording what was going on. People were telling me that I wasn't allowed to record what was going on. They were saying it was against the rules, saying don't record, don't film in the hospitals. And, we're in the middle of a genocide here. This entity is bombing hospitals. It's executing children. It's shooting them in the head. Snipers are playing target practice with children. The hospitals are being actively bombed. Journalists are being burnt alive in their tents on the hospital grounds. Children are coming in malnourished, cachexic, dying of starvation. Children are coming blown to pieces. Women have got 80 to 90% body burns, and we don't have any dressings. Now, when you're there in that kind of place, what's the rules to this? The rules are I'm not allowed to record what's going on, but they're allowed to do this. Is that the rules? And no one's writing and telling you how you're meant to function in a genocide. No one's telling you how do you advocate for a people in a genocide. How do you stop the bombs from raining down as just a doctor and aid worker in the middle of this war zone? There's no book written on this. There are these set of rules that have been written down by these organizations that are not stopping this genocide, that are not stopping it. So if we follow the rules, what's going to happen? The genocide is going to continue. Someone has to do something differently. So, making those decisions to start recording what's going on in Gaza, the decision was just, if I'm not even allowed to bring medicine into Gaza to treat these people, the least I can do is bear witness. The least I can do is show the world what's happening here. And that was kind of like the decision when I was there in Gaza, was just to record and show the world. And I didn't realize the impact that that had on the world. I didn't realize the impact that that had on so many people around the world, because when I arrived back and I arrived at Perth Airport, there was just hundreds of people that were there to greet me and applaud me and cheer me. And I just remember thinking, like, what did I do? I don't deserve this. Like, there's doctors and nurses in Gaza that are working 24-hour shifts for 2 years in a row, who've had their whole family killed, who are injured, who still turn up to work. There are far more experienced surgeons and doctors that have been to Gaza than me. But I think, the one thing that I think maybe that resonated with people was that I was there to tell the story of the people of Gaza as a Gazan that grew up in the West. I was like the bridge. I was that guy with the English accent that was opening up his phone and talking about Gaza because I'm from Gaza, but yet here I have this perfect English accent. And I was walking down the streets of Gaza and I was telling the story of different people in the hospitals and patients, and I was showing what was happening there. I also showed, what life was like with my family in Gaza. And I think those things, people were looking at it and were going, this is just a regular guy like me and you. And here he is in Gaza in this middle of this war zone, and he's taken us on this, he's taken us along on this journey of like what it's like to be here. And I think that really just resonated with so many people. And I think just being honest and saying what was on your mind and on your heart, I think that's what people wanted to see. Because there's no journalists allowed into Gaza, I felt like I was almost filling that void of a Western journalist. It's there are obviously Palestinian journalists in Gaza who are doing a phenomenal job, but for some reason, a Western audience, they don't humanize Palestinians enough to listen to a Palestinian voice. But yet, when you have a Palestinian voice that's in a British accent and is, going along with a Western NGO, it just seemed to hit differently, I think, to some people. And I think that was, I'd like to think that that was the start, or one of the major starters, of doctors recording themselves in Gaza and doing a video blog. And I think after I left, so many doctors were more willing to film what was going on in Gaza, to film their thoughts and how they felt in the moment, and just connect Gaza to a human situation on a human level. You know, when you're watching the news and you're seeing, like, these journalists, and they're recording to you how, there's 50 people coming in on the back of ambulances, and people being brought in on blankets, and people being back on the donkey carts, and mothers carrying their children in plastic bags and bringing them in. And you're watching this carnage, and you're watching these screams and everything like that. There's a real difference when you have a Western doctor who then is sitting down and recording and telling you how they feel. And I think people wanted to see that, like, it's not crazy to feel like this isn't okay, to feel overwhelmed by the images that you're seeing, that even the doctors that are working there and in the middle of this chaos, they're not okay. They're not okay. And this doctor works in the NHS, he works in the public service system in Australia. Like, this is your normal, regular doctor, and they're telling you that they can't cope with this, that this isn't normal. They're crying on camera, they're breaking down. People are following this, and it is changing how people are viewing this conflict. And if anything, I hope that that was maybe something that I helped give the movement, which was just this idea that we can humanize people by just being honest, by just telling the story, you know? And sometimes it takes a Western accent and a Western voice to tell that story. But I'm just telling the same story that Palestinian journalists are telling. And the reason why my stories maybe resonate is because I am Palestinian and I am from Gaza. You know, I got married in Gaza. You know, I met my wife in Gaza. Like, these are very typical Palestinian Gazan stories. In the middle of a genocide, you get married and you have a wedding. And then after the wedding finishes, you clock in and go to work. And you're dealing with children that have been blown to pieces on the same day that you're going to get married. This is this is the story of Palestinians and Gazans. And I feel like, you know, that's maybe why I had resonated. And, you know, sometimes, you know, people will question, you know, me and who does he think he is? He wants to bring a hospital into Gaza and this, that, and the other. Do you know, like I said, I'm only one of 3 Gazans from the West that went to Gaza. If I'm not going to be the one that is going to try and push to improve the healthcare system in Gaza as one of the only 3 Gazan doctors, then who else is it going to be? And if it is somebody else, then, you know, what does it say about us as Palestinians when we're not willing to lead our voices when we are, as a collective, as a people, experiencing a genocide? It you know, the only way that we are going to get through this as Palestinians is if we as Palestinians lead the way, because it is the fact that we have been so dehumanized, that we have been looked over so many times, that has brought us to this situation. And I just felt like, you know, hey, look, I'm a young doctor. I don't have I've not media trained. I don't have all the experience in the world of how to do this, how to bring a hospital in the middle of a war zone. I've not worked for the UN or any big NGO or anything like that. But I do know something. I know I couldn't live with myself if I didn't try. And that's kind of like the Palestinian story. You know, the odds are stacked against us. They always have been. But even if the odds are stacked against us, you have to sometimes just, you know, just walk with faith, not with sight. And that's all I was trying to do. I was just saying, you know what, let me just use this momentum and let me tell the story of what it is to be a Palestinian. And maybe people will fall in love with the Palestinian people and their story. And, you know, I've never tried to overshadow any other Palestinian or anything like that. I always try and elevate other Palestinians. But what I'm trying to do is I'm just trying to let the world at least know that these human beings that are being killed in their hundreds every single day have stories, they have feelings, they have dreams, they have aspirations, they have hope. And I'm like them. And if you get to know me, you then get to know vicariously Palestinian people. And when Palestinian people die, you go, "What, are they all like this guy? You know, they seem to be down to earth. They seem to be normal. They seem to be intelligent and articulate. I can, I can resonate with somebody like that. I can see myself having a drink with somebody like that. I can see myself going out for dinner or playing football with someone like that." And, you know, that's all I've tried to do. All I've tried to do is I've tried to bring the humanity back to Palestinian people, and I've taken that to go to wherever I need to go, whether that's politicians, whether that's world leaders, and address them not at the level of anger and criticism and you need to do this and you need to do that. That's not the way to do it, or not the way that I think is the way to do it. The way I feel the best way to do it is to sit there and almost think of it like these people are misinformed. These people don't know who we are. And it's my job to tell them who we are. It's my job to remind them that Palestinian people deserve the right to live. And I have to change that perception. Now that might not be the right way to go for other people, right? They might think of that as the wrong method. They might think that you have to be a bit more aggressive and a bit more, you know, um, a bit more on the offensive. And I understand that. But when you've been to Gaza and you've seen the amount of death that I've seen, and you've seen how mutilated these children are, and the desperation on these people's faces when they come into hospital and their entire children are in plastic bags, melted. When you hear bombs that have been dropped that shake the rooms that you're in, and you fear for your own life, and you think to yourself, how are children living in this for 2 years? Where I'm scared, I'm petrified of what's going on around me. And, you know, to me, I'm just like, this can't be okay. This can't be okay, what's happening. If I can just tell the story of this, if I can just tell these people, these politicians, this, maybe they'll listen. Maybe something in their heart will ignite. I've got to believe that they're human beings as well. I've got to believe that they'll see our humanity. So that's what I've tried to do. That's what I've tried to do. And look, it's not easy. The Israelis, even after a ceasefire, still won't let anything in. I've taken this to the highest politicians in the land. I've spoken to the British Prime Minister. I've spoken to the British Middle East envoy. I've spoken to the Australian Foreign Secretary. I've addressed the Irish President, the Irish Deputy President, Prime Minister, the um, Foreign Development Minister of Ireland, the Foreign Development Minister of um, Australia, Canadian ministers. Do like there's not been a place that I haven't gone to, and I've done this not with a big aid organization behind me or anything. I've literally done this with me, my phone, social media, and just my story and just talking to people. And that's opened doors for me. And there's not many us Palestinian doctors that are allowed to speak or given a platform to speak. And that's why, like, some days I want to quit. Some days I don't want to do this anymore. The backlash that I face online is horrific sometimes. The death threats that I get are horrific. The racism that I deal with is off the charts. But I just say to myself, like, there's not many of us Palestinian doctors, and there's not many of those that did go are willing to put themselves out there so much. So, do I cower in silence and watch as my family and as my people are slaughtered and killed? Or do I say to myself, I'll give this a roll of the dice and I'll try? And, that's essentially what I've tried to do is just roll the dice and see what happens. And, I'll just let bygones be bygones. Whatever happens, happens. But, one day in 5 years' time, people are going to look back at this and they're always going to say that they were against it, you know. And I want to tell my children that, hey, when all of this was going on, your father didn't give up.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. It seems as though, first of all, just like to take a second just to acknowledge your fighting spirit and your ability to articulate what's going on in Gaza and what has been going on. And you mentioned you've gone to the highest levels. Well, you've gone to presidents, the British Prime Minister, you've gone to the Irish president and deputy prime minister, or deputy, I think the Taoiseach, if I'm correct, or as you mentioned, or the deputy. And yeah, it seems as though that no matter how much it's talked about, are you finding that with the, I know you're back from you're I know you're back from Gaza now, you're in Perth, but are you still finding yourself talking about this? And I'd also like to acknowledge the amount of hate you're getting. You mentioned the amount of death threats and the
Uh,
amount of racism and the amount of like, that must not be easy on the human spirit. That must, like, it must be very challenging for you, or forgive me if I'm wrong, every day to talk about your story on social media, even when you're in Gaza and even now. Do you find just the amount of the spirit that you have, Dr. Mo or Dr. Mohammed, to put yourself in a position where you're you're working full time and you're also doing this for Gaza, doing this for the Palestinian people, doing this from your background, and you're speaking to the world. Do you feel like no one's listening? If you don't mind me asking, do you feel that no one's hearing you where you're at, or do you find that now they're starting to hear, now they're starting to listen?
you know, people are listening, but the listening is not the actions. You know, there's no actions to go along with the listening. It's almost pointless talking to somebody if there's no actions. So, like I say, what I've tried to do is, you know, it's frustrating. It's frustrating because people are dying every day. That's what hurts. I don't care if I'm embarrassed or I have to deal with the abuse, and I don't care. Like, I just care about doing something for these kids in Gaza, doing something for these people that have endured a genocide. I mean, they've literally endured a genocide. What more can a human being endure than a genocide? I mean, it's probably like the worst thing you can endure. Every imaginable crime, every imaginable horror show that we've seen in the last 2 years coming out of Gaza, those people have lived it. And yeah, yeah, you know, I just want to do this for them. So, again, I don't like making it about me because it's not about me, it's about them. And that's what we have to focus on. We have to focus on doing the best that we can for them.
Yeah, thanks for that, Dr. Mohammed. And I'd love to know if there's one thing that someone can take away out there that maybe has resources or the ability to support the people in Gaza or or Palestine. What could they do today or maybe this week, maybe coming up to the, I don't want to bring up the maybe just the Christmas period, if people think maybe are giving back at this time, especially in Ireland where based. So I'd love to know, is there anything people could do top of mind, that or one thing?
Do you know, I'll never ever say to anyone, do this specific thing. What I'll just say to everyone is just do what you can. Do what you can. You know, this is going to be a moment in history that defines the world. It defines where we move next in the next few years. Is AI going to be used to better humanity, or is it going to be used to kill people like it has been in Gaza? Is it going to be used as a tool of good and a tool of helping humanity, or is it going to be used as a tool of oppression all over the world? And Gaza is the focal point of what's going to answer that. Are we going to live in a world where might is right? Are we going to live in a world where the rules don't apply as long as no one can enforce those rules on you? And what I would say to people is, it might not be happening on your door today, but Gaza is the catalyst for what could happen on your door in 10 years' time and in 20 years' time. So don't forget about Gaza. Don't forget about the people of Gaza and just keep fighting. Keep fighting, do what you can because we're all in this together. We're all human beings. We're not the 1%. We're not the elites. Not the ones that own islands and bunkers and endless amounts of money and power and resources. We're just trying to get by day to day like everybody else. That's who we are. We're all in this boat together. And it doesn't matter your race, your religion, your color. We are just human beings on this shared planet. And I think that's what my message would be to people is just remember that. Remember that we share a common humanity.
That's a great message. That's a really great message that we all share a common humanity. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, especially during a time of giving and And I'd love to know. It said, Dr. Mohammed, on your just at the bottom, it mentioned that. Let me just campaigning globally for construction of a children's hospital in Gaza, built from modular functions, funded by donors and staffed by international medical teams. Is that something that's top of mind for you at the moment? Is can
Yeah.
list
It's
examples?
always
Or?
it's always there. You know, there's a maternity and neonatal hospital on the border in Jordan waiting to go in. It's it'll when it comes in, it'll come in with its own staff. It has um it has uh caravans and modules that can refill oxygen cylinders. It can make its own oxygen and refill oxygen cylinders. It's solar panel powered. It will augment existing hospitals and help the capacity of existing hospitals. Like that's what we've got. We've got one of those ready at the Jordanian border. It just needs to go in. If that hospital goes in, that's the prototype. And if we can show them that this works, then hopefully governments can get behind it and can start bringing in these modular hospitals into Gaza while Gaza's waiting to be rebuilt. You know, but we just got to keep going.
Yeah, that's it's great to hear this progress being made, and you mentioned that have to keep going. And I'd love to know just from the future and looking forward, uh, is there what's it like there at the moment? You probably know on a weekly basis or a daily basis. I'd love to know your perspective on what it's like and maybe any outlook for the future on Gaza and Palestine. I'd love to know your perspective on it.
You know, the equivalent of six atomic bombs have been dropped on Gaza. You know, it is dire situation in Gaza, from living conditions, from the type of food that people eat, from the diseases, from the lack of social care, you know, people with disabilities and don't have wheelchairs, amputees, largest cohort of orphans, kids that have been malnourished and have gone through stage 5 famine, maybe multiple times in 2 years. They've gone in and out of this famine. People have experienced traumas that they are just now beginning to learn and deal with. So I think, you know, Gaza is going to take a lot of work for those people to be okay. But I also feel that this is the beginning of the end for the people that did this to Gaza. This is it now. This is the beginning of the end because there's nowhere to go from a genocide. There's nowhere to go from a genocide. It's not something where the world can accept. And I think the world is showing that they can't accept a genocide. And like I say, it might not politically be viable today, but there will be these Nuremberg trials will happen. People will be brought to The Hague. If it's not today, it'll be tomorrow, it'll be the year after that or the year after that. But it's going to happen because the world has forever changed after what they saw in Gaza. The images that have come out of Gaza have haunted people from all walks of life, of all ages, of all races, and of all religions. So I think the future for Palestine as a whole is bright. You know, we have a bright future ahead of us. It's the start of a beautiful long walk to freedom. It's happening. And I think that's something that we can all be very proud of and happy for. But that doesn't mean that we get complacent because it's a long walk and there's going to be a lot of resistance right now. You know, the when when a you know when an animal is in a corner, that's when it's at its most dangerous. And Israel right now is isolated. The mask has come off. The world has seen who they are. And that's when they're most dangerous because they feel like they have nothing to lose right now. So they might want to expand and take parts of Lebanon and Syria and annex the West Bank and ethnically cleanse Gaza and enact the Greater Israel Plan. But that's why we've got to be more vigilant than ever before. And that's why we've got to fight harder than ever before because the goals of genocide are only just the start of what could be a very long and painful, you know, last chapter in this story of the Palestinian people.
Thank you for sharing that, Mohammed. And I know there's still a humanitarian crisis going on. Just for someone that's, I didn't explain at the start, for someone that's maybe it's the first time coming across. Um, your story. I just love to just help. Feel free to correct me on this, especially if someone's new to hearing this. Maybe they're not with the amount of media attention that's been brought. But just quickly, what is a genocide? It says genocide is the intentional destruction in whole or in part of a nation, or excuse me, of a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. The definition comes from the UN Genocide Convention 1948. According to the treaty, genocide includes acts such as killing members of the group, causing serious bodily harm or mental harm, deliberately inflicting conditions of life meant to bring about a group's physical destruction. Number four, preventing births within the group. Number five, forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. Key point, genocide is defined not only by what happens, but by intent, meaning the perpetrators must aim to destroy the protected group. And just so there, you mentioned that there is hope for Palestine and the future is bright, but I just love to maybe reiterate, and forgive me if I'm wrong here, that there is still a humanitarian crisis there, and it's still there is a hospital on its way. But if I'm correct in saying that, Dr. Mohammed, there is still a very big humanitarian crisis, and maybe and it's not maybe, but excuse me, a genocide.
Yeah, look, the pretty much every human rights group, Israeli human rights group, the UN, former US army officials, former Israeli military officials have called what's going on in Gaza war crimes and a genocide. Like for me, I just don't even think it's worth even arguing the point with someone who doesn't believe it's a genocide, because you're looking at these images and you see the intent. You know, they're literally saying we want to wipe out. There's no innocence in Gaza. Kill their children. They're playing target practice with children's heads. They're starving 1 million children, the largest cohort of child amputees in the world, the largest cohort of dead children in the world, the largest cohort of orphans in the world. There's no longer discussion of whether or not it's a genocide or not. The actual discussion is why did we allow this to happen and how we're going to stop it. That's the question. Not if there's a genocide. The question is how do we stop this genocide? That's the question now. And I feel like even discussing whether it's a genocide or not just takes away from it, almost gives credence to those that say it's not a genocide when we discuss or even entertain the idea. There's nothing to entertain. I mean, it's obvious to the whole world what's going on, that it's a genocide, So yeah, I mean, it is what it is. But like I say, I feel like we've got to stay focused. We've got to stay focused. Like I say, the genocide is only the start of the downward spiral. They, you know, they've got a taste for it, and if we don't stop them, this is going to continue. But like I say, I feel like it's the beginning of the end. Just how long is this last chapter? I don't know.
Yeah, and that's a really probably great point. This I suppose this last chapter, and hopefully even though the future is bright for Palestine, but as you mentioned, but the last chapter in the genocide, do you think it is, or the humanitarian crisis, that this is the final chapter?
Yeah, this is the final chapter. We just don't know if the final chapter is going to be played out in Gaza, if it's going to be the West Bank, if it's going to be Syria, Lebanon. But this is the final chapter. We don't know what's going to happen in this final chapter. But it things are definitely going to change.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And do you think, and this is probably the last, I hope you don't mind, but do you think the solution, maybe is something coming to mind right now about a short term, medium term, or longer term solution for Gaza and Palestine? Do you see that as there talks? You don't feel like, if you don't feel like talking about it on the podcast, you don't have to, but maybe I'd love to know if there's
You
maybe.
know, I mean, look, what's the short term solution is the full implementation of the ceasefire. Is Israel has to withdraw from Gaza. There has to be no more killing, no more bombing. The problem is Israel will never stop. They will never stop. They never have stopped. From the Nakba till today, they have killed Palestinians almost daily. And this is why, we are getting to a stage now where I couldn't tell you what's going to be the short term of what needs to be done because, you saw that there's meant to be a ceasefire and they're just still killing people at will. They've killed over 300 people in Gaza since the ceasefire. So these are not people that play by any set of standards or rules. So therefore, it's hard to say that this is what needs to happen next because these are not people that play by those rules. These are not people who have ever abided by international law. These are people who feel like it is literally their God given right to take that piece of land. And therefore, it's hard to predict how those people are going to act and behave. All we can do, though, is just keep going the way that we are going and keep trying and keep fighting and don't give up an inch. Keep fighting the whole way through because they have not they have not stopped in their killing and we can't stop in our advocacy.
Yeah, so the advocacy is a very important part of today and coming on the podcast. And you mentioned the ceasefire is a short term solution. Is there a medium term or longer term solution for Gaza if there was a ceasefire? Is anything from?
Well, the medium and the medium term would be the Palestinian self determination. It'd be the people of Gaza deciding who governs them. That'll be the medium term, and the long term would be the path to, whether it's a one state or a two state or whatever it is. But the medium term is Palestinians need to have the right to self determination. That's the medium term solution to all of this. The conditions of what led to October 2023 was there was no the fact that Palestinians didn't have a right to self determination. So that's the thing that needs to happen in the medium term. That's the thing that's going to cool down, a lot of anger from the genocide is if Palestinians get their self determination or the ability to at least in part have some self determination moving forward into the next phases.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Well, I suppose in the fact that I suppose everyone wants a right to. I know you meant self determination in America. I think they call it. Let me just double check. I think it's liberty or
Yeah.
and the Statue of Liberty and whatnot. Let me just double check. I don't want to say something that's incorrect here. Yeah, freedom. Liberty means freedom, but not just any kind. It refers to the ability of a person to act, speak, think, and live without unnecessary interference, especially from a government or other authorities. That's
Yeah.
notable. Um, but you mentioned the sort of self determination for the Palestinian people to decide who governs them. And yeah, that's I suppose hopefully they can get to a place that where there is that ceasefire in the short term, where it does stop in the medium term, that sort of freedom and that self determination to decide who governs them
Yep.
with,
Yep.
and then longer term, I suppose for the situation, whether it's going to be a one state or two state. Do you know how that could play out, or is it very much just
I mean, I don't think anyone really knows how that can play out because this is down to what's going to happen with the own internal Israeli politics. What's going to happen within Israel itself. Um, Israel's going through a bit of its own internal crisis with people. You know, the Orthodox community not wanting to enlist in the military, and that's becoming a new thing. People being disillusioned by, the perpetual wars that Israel seems to be finding itself in. So Israel has a lot of internal conflicts, and that's going to really shape how this moves forward and what this state looks like. Is what happens within Israel itself, within the Israeli population. So we'll see from there.
yeah, that's super interesting. I didn't realize that there were some
A lot.
internal issues going on. So, uh, well, thank you for coming on today.
No, thank you for having me. Well, thank you for being so patient of trying to get me on. I've obviously been just a very busy guy, and I've been traveling all around the world. So, like, yeah, just thank God we fitted in today.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And there's so much to take from episode, and I
Yeah,
appreciate you also sharing with people from Ireland and a few other countries and about the story from your perspective and from maybe the other people's perspective as well, the voices of Gaza. I'd love to know maybe is there any action item that you'd like the listeners to they could find you on social media? See, you don't have to, but if they can find you on social media, or is there
yeah. Just
anything? Is there
find me
anything
on social
out
media.
there?
Follow me. once we get a bit more about what's going on and what these governments are talking about behind the scenes with regards to the hospital, I'll inform the people that are following me. So just give us a follow on Instagram, or Twitter or whatever else, and yeah, and hopefully something good will happen.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you,
All right.
Dr. Mohammed. Yeah, yeah.
Thank you so
Enjoy
much
having
for
this
having me.
session. No worries. Have a great rest of your day, and hopefully this be uploaded this week or later this week. And yeah, I
Thank
appreciate
you,
the
man.
conversation.
Thank
No
you, buddy.
worries.
Cheers, man. Take
Take it
care.
easy. See you later.
Bye bye. Bye bye.